Chapter 1. The spark of ruin. The rain tasted like copper and engine oil, a bitter metallic slurry that ran down Elias Thorne's face and soaked into the frayed collar of his jacket. He didn't wipe it away. His hands were occupied, buried deep inside the exposed viscera of a high-voltage utility box, his fingers moving with the precise, agonizing slowness of a bomb technician. Around him, the city of Seattle wept a relentless, freezing deluge. The storm masked the sound of his work, the snap of heavy-duty wire cutters, the scrape of stripped insulation, the low, angry hum of 10,000 volts begging for a pathway to the earth. Elias. The voice crackled in his right ear, rendered sharp and tinny by the encrypted earpiece. You're running out of shadow. The perimeter drones are on a randomized sweep, but they'll be looping back to your quadrant in exactly 4 minutes. I know, Evie, Elias muttered, clenching a penlight between his teeth so he could free up a hand. I'm navigating the primary trunk line. Sterling didn't just wire his house, he built a fortress. It's wrapped in a secondary biometric mesh. If I slip by a millimeter, I don't just trip an alarm. I become a charcoal briquette. Just don't slip, Evelyn Cross replied. Her voice was cool, a steadying anchor in the turbulent dark. Evelyn was holed up in a windowless van 3 miles away, watching the digital ghost of the grid pulse across her monitors. She was the only person left in the world who still answered Elias's calls. The only one who hadn't bought into the lie. 3 minutes, 40 seconds. I need you inside the physical layer before they ping the junction. Elias exhaled, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He stared at the thick, braided cables pulsing with lethal current. Electricity was a restless, hungry beast. Elias had spent his entire life learning how to tame it, how to coax it through silicon and copper, how to build the very smart grids that now governed the modern world. He had been a maestro of the current. Now, he was just a rat in the mud, gnawing at the wires. His mind, unbidden, flashed back to the day the music stopped. 6 months ago. The air had smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather, not ozone and wet garbage. He had been sitting in the suffocatingly pristine office of Senator Richard Sterling. Sterling had poured a glass of 20-year-old scotch, sliding it across a desk carved from a single slab of endangered mahogany. The senator had smiled, a perfectly calibrated expression of paternal warmth that didn't reach his flat, obsidian eyes. It's a minor variance, Elias, Sterling had said, his voice as smooth as the liquor. A slight degradation in the fail-safes of the new municipal power initiative. Nothing a man of your talents can't overlook. The contract is worth billions, and my partners are willing to ensure your personal accounts reflect your flexibility. Elias had looked at the schematics. It wasn't a minor variance. It was a catastrophic flaw. To cut costs, Sterling's shell companies had sourced substandard localized transformers. If a surge hit the grid, the fail-safes wouldn't just degrade, they would melt. Entire neighborhoods would burn. Elias had stood up, leaving the scotch untouched. He had refused. He had threatened to go to the oversight committee. He hadn't even made it to the lobby before his life was dismantled. Senator Richard Sterling didn't use thugs with baseball bats. He used algorithms. He used quiet phone calls to bank presidents and media conglomerates. By the time Elias reached his apartment, his security clearance was revoked. By morning, his bank accounts were frozen under the guise of an ongoing federal embezzlement probe. By the end of the week, he was evicted, blacklisted, and branded a paranoid, disgruntled saboteur by every major news outlet in the country. Sterling had unmade him with the push of a button. Elias. 2 minutes. Evelyn's voice dragged him back to the freezing mud. Heart rate is spiking. Breathe. You're gripping the shunts too hard. Elias blinked, shaking the ghost of Sterling's smile from his vision. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. Not from the cold, but from the sheer, suffocating weight of the hatred that had kept him alive for the last 6 months. I'm fine, he whispered, forcing his muscles to relax. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a heavy, cylindrical device. It was ugly, pieced together from salvaged server racks and stolen military-grade capacitors. He called it the Faraday shunt. It was designed to do the impossible, siphon a microscopic fraction of power and data from a closed-loop system without registering a drop in voltage to the system's overseers. He knelt in the sludge, leaning closer to the junction box. Looming on the cliffside above him, barely visible through the torrential rain, was Sterling's estate. It was a monolithic structure of glass and black steel, a smart mansion that boasted absolute autonomy. It generated its own power, filtered its own air, and ran on a proprietary artificial intelligence network that Sterling claimed was impenetrable. Tonight, Elias was going to prove him wrong. He clamped the first lead of the Faraday shunt onto the neutral wire, wincing as a stray spark bit through his soaked glove, leaving a scorch mark on his palm. He ignored the sting. Pain was just data, it meant he was still alive. Attaching the bypass, Elias said, his voice dropping to a gravelly murmur. He took the second lead, a razor-thin needle of conductive tungsten, and hovered it over the main data trunk running parallel to the power line. Evie, get ready to catch the handshake. When I pierce the shielding, we're going to get a flood of encrypted telemetry. You'll have exactly 4 seconds to spoof the MAC address before Sterling's AI realizes we're knocking. Spoofer is primed and looping a clean diagnostic signature, Evelyn confirmed, the frantic clacking of a mechanical keyboard bleeding through the comms. 1 minute, Elias. The drones are banking around the east wing. They have thermal. If they catch you bleeding body heat by that box, you're dead. Then I'd better be quick. Elias held his breath. He pressed the tungsten needle into the thick black shielding of the data trunk. It required a delicate, terrifying balance of force. Too little, and he wouldn't hit the fiber optic core. Too much, and he would sever the line, plunging the estate into a lockdown protocol that would instantly dispatch armed security. Crunch, the needle broke the shielding. A microscopic flash of blue light illuminated the interior of the utility box. Contact. Elias hissed. I'm in the vein. Talk to me, Evie. Silence stretched over the comms, heavy and agonizing. The rain hammered against Elias's back. He counted the seconds in his head. 1. 2. 3. If the AI rejected the spoof, the junction box would automatically electrify its outer casing to fry tamperers. Elias braced his boots against the mud, ready to throw himself backward. 4. We're in, Evelyn breathed, a rare note of elation piercing her stoic facade. Sweet mother of code, Elias, we're actually in. The shunt is holding. Voltage drop is at 0.001%. Within acceptable weather variance. The AI accepted the spoof. We have a backdoor into the Sterling estate. Elias slowly let out his breath, the tension leaving his shoulders in a shuddering wave. He reached down and engaged the locking mechanism on the shunt, securing it to the wires. He closed the heavy metal door of the utility box, wiping away the mud he had tracked onto the handle. He stood up, his joints popping in protest against the cold. He looked up the cliffside. The mansion sat there, a crown of arrogance perched above the suffering city. Its windows glowed with a warm, golden light, completely oblivious to the parasite that had just latched onto its nervous system. Inside that house was the private server containing the unredacted blueprints of the Municipal Power Initiative, the proof of Sterling's corruption, the evidence that would clear Elias's name, and the digital keys to the senator's offshore empire. Pack it up and get out of there, Evelyn said. Drone sweep passing overhead in 10 seconds. Elias pulled his hood over his head, melting back into the shadows of the tree line just as the low, whining hum of an aerial security drone swept over the utility box. A beam of infrared light washed over the ground where he had been kneeling moments before, finding nothing but rain and mud. I'm clear, Elias said, turning his back on the mansion and beginning the long, treacherous trek down the slippery embankment. He had lost his career. He had lost his home. He had lost his name. But as he felt the faint, rhythmic vibration of the Faraday shunt communicating with his wrist pad, a grim, jagged smile touched his lips. Senator Sterling had taken everything from him. Now, Elias Thorne was going to burn the man's world to ashes, spark by spark. The air inside the interstitial walls of Senator Richard Sterling's estate tasted of pulverized drywall, ancient pine resin, and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. Elias Thorne pressed his spine against a load-bearing beam, his chest compressed in the suffocating 18-inch gap between the mansion's opulent vaulted ceiling and the slate roof. Above him, the summer storm battered the shingles, a rhythmic drumming that masked the sound of his ragged breathing. Below him lay the lion's den. Pacing, Elias, the voice in his earpiece murmured. Evelyn Cross sounded as cool and frictionless as a pane of glass. You're breathing like a cornered animal. Your heart rate is spiking on my monitor. Bring it down. Easy for you to say, Elias whispered, the microphone at his jaw picking up the faint vibration of his vocal cords. He shifted his weight, wincing as a stray roofing nail snagged the shoulder of his black tactical canvas. You're sitting in an air-conditioned van 3 miles away. I'm swimming through fiberglass insulation in a billionaire's attic. A billionaire who is currently hosting 3 armed patrols on the 2nd floor, Evelyn corrected, the tapping of her keyboard bleeding through the comms. Patrol Alpha is rounding the east corridor. You have 4 minutes before they pass directly beneath your current position. Have you reached the primary junction? Almost there. Elias slid his night vision goggles down over his eyes. The world shifted into a hyper-detailed, monochromatic sea of phosphorescent green. The architectural skeleton of Sterling's mansion revealed itself, a labyrinth of HVAC ducts, copper plumbing, and the thick, serpentine bundles of fiber-optic cables that served as the estate's nervous system. Sterling had spent $5 million turning his sprawling Virginia manor into an impenetrable fortress. The security system was a masterpiece of paranoia, boasting military-grade thermal sensors, biometric scanners at every threshold, and an autonomous lockdown protocol designed to seal the house tighter than a subterranean vault at the first sign of intrusion. But a fortress, Elias knew, was only as strong as its wiring. And Sterling had made one fatal error: he had assumed the threat would come from the outside. Elias belly-crawled forward, his elbows digging into the wooden joists. He moved with agonizing deliberation, distributing his weight to avoid snapping the plasterboard beneath him. If he slipped, he would crash through the ceiling and land squarely in the middle of the senator's private art gallery. 50 feet down the crawlspace, nestled beside a massive silver ventilation duct, was the objective, a steel utility box marked with the red hazard chevron of the mansion's central security trunk. Elias reached the box and pulled a specialized multi-tool from his harness. At the trunk, he breathed. I'm opening her up. Copy that, Evelyn said. Remember the sequence, Elias. The Faraday protocol demands perfection. You aren't just blinding the system, you're turning it into a bear trap. I know. Elias popped the latches. The metal door swung open, revealing a dense jungle of color-coded wiring, microrelays, and blinking LED nodes. This was the heart of the beast. Elias's mission wasn't sabotage, it was an aggressive rewiring. In the aftermath of the ruin Sterling had brought upon Elias's life, a simple assassination would have been too merciful. Sterling needed to feel the walls closing in. He needed his own power turned against him. Elias extracted a small, black cylindrical device from his belt, a custom-built capacitor array Evelyn had engineered. He gripped his wire cutters, his hands slick with sweat inside his latex gloves. Severing the tertiary alarm relay, Elias whispered. He snipped a cluster of yellow wires. The green LEDs on the board flickered, then stabilized. The system hadn't noticed the amputation. Clean, Evelyn confirmed. Now, bridged the biometric feedback loop. Here was the genius of their plan. Elias stripped the casing from a heavy-gauge blue cable, the power feed for the biometric door locks, and spliced it directly into the mansion's main high-voltage defense grid using the black capacitor. He wasn't disabling the locks. He was creating a deadly feedback loop. The next time the system went into lockdown, the biometric keypads wouldn't just refuse entry, they would discharge a lethal, localized arc of electricity into anyone touching them. Sterling's ultimate defense mechanism was now a lethal weapon primed for its master. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath Elias vibrated. "Hold," Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip in his ear. "Alpha Patrol. Directly beneath you. And Elias. Sterling is with them." Elias froze. He killed his headlamp and the night vision goggles, plunging himself into absolute darkness. He pressed his face against the dusty wood, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Through the thin plaster, voices drifted up, muffled but distinct. "I don't care what the committee says," Senator Sterling's voice boomed, rich with the arrogant baritone that had won him 3 elections. "The offshore accounts are insulated. If the SEC starts poking around the shell companies, you tell them to talk to my lawyers. I will not have my operation stalled because some bureaucratic parasite got cold feet." "Yes, Senator," a deeper, gruffer voice replied, likely the head of security. "And the external perimeter? Double the guards. After what happened to the Thorn facility, I want this place airtight. Nobody gets in or out without my explicit authorization." In the suffocating dark of the crawlspace, Elias clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached. The Thorn facility. The spark of ruin. Sterling spoke of the catastrophic fire that had destroyed Elias's life's work and killed his brother as if it were a minor logistical annoyance. The phantom heat of that night flared in Elias's scarred forearms, a searing reminder of why he was suffocating in this dusty tomb. A bead of sweat rolled down Elias's nose, hung at the tip, and dropped, splashing silently onto the plasterboard. "Sir," the biometric locks in the west wing showed a momentary voltage fluctuation, the security chief noted. Elias's breath hitched. His hand hovered over the exposed wires of the junction box. If they ran a diagnostic now, they would see the bypass. "Is it a breach?" Sterling demanded, his tone sharpening. There was a torturous pause. Elias could hear the faint, synthetic beep of a handheld tablet. "No, sir," the guard finally replied. "Looks like a minor power surge from the storm. System is green across the board." "Then stop wasting my time with trivia," Sterling snapped. "I'll be in my study. Do not disturb me." Heavy footsteps echoed against the hardwood below, gradually fading down the corridor. Elias let out a long, slow exhale, his muscles trembling from the adrenaline dump. "They're clear," Evelyn whispered, her voice betraying a hint of the tension she'd been holding. "Finish the splice, Elias. We are running out of time." Elias flicked his night vision back on. He grabbed his soldering iron, the battery-powered tip glowing a fierce, cherry red. With surgical precision, he melted the alloy over the spliced connection, fusing the lethal feedback loop into the mansion's architecture. He wrapped the exposed copper in heat-shrink tubing and tucked the rigged capacitor behind the main circuit board, completely obscuring it from view. "Splice is secure," Elias said, closing the utility box and wiping away any trace of his fingerprints or sweat with a microfiber cloth. "The beast is rewired. If Sterling triggers the lockdown protocol, the keypads will push 4,000 volts through his fingertips." "Excellent work," Evelyn said. "Now we just need to give him a reason to hit the panic button. Begin your exfiltration. Proceed to the north ventilation shaft." Elias began to crawl backward, sliding through the shadows like a ghost. The air was still hot, still choking with dust, but the oppressive weight of the mansion felt different now. It was no longer a fortress keeping him out. It was a giant, mechanical spiderweb, and Senator Sterling was standing right in the center, completely unaware that the spider had already come and gone. Elias reached the louvered grate of the north vent, the cool, damp air of the stormy night washing over his face. He looked back into the dark expanse of the attic one last time. "I'm out," Elias murmured into the comms, slipping through the opening and onto the slick slate roof. Rain lashed against his face, washing away the dust of the crawlspace. "Stage 2 is a go, Evelyn. Let's burn his world down." The Sterling Estates Grand Ballroom was a cathedral built to worship excess. Above the sprawling expanse of imported Italian marble, a staggering, three-tiered chandelier hung like a frozen explosion of diamond and spun glass, casting a fractured, kaleidoscopic glow over the apex predators of Washington. The air was thick with the scent of white orchids, aged bourbon, and the subtle, metallic tang of cold hard power. It was a gilded sanctuary, impervious to the struggles of the world beyond its reinforced mahogany doors. But to Elias Thorne, it was just a circuit board waiting to be shorted. Elias stood near the perimeter of the room, nursing a flute of champagne he had no intention of drinking. His bespoke midnight blue tuxedo, tailored to the millimeter, felt less like clothing and more like a tactical skin. It allowed him to blend flawlessly into the sea of senators, tech magnates, and defense contractors. He was a ghost in the machine, breathing the same air as the men and women he was about to dismantle. "Audio check," a voice murmured in his right ear, the sound carried through a bone conduction earpiece so small it was practically microscopic. "Tell me I don't look like a tragic cliché in this silk." Elias allowed a fractional smirk to touch his lips. He let his gaze drift across the sea of black-tie elite until he found her. Evelyn Cross was holding court near a towering ice sculpture of a swan. She wore a backless crimson gown that moved like liquid fire, her dark hair swept up in an intricate twist that exposed the elegant line of her neck. She looked devastating. More importantly, she looked like she belonged. "You look like a distraction," Elias murmured, his lips barely moving. "Which is exactly what we need." "Status?" "I'm 3 feet away from the secondary server node," Evelyn replied, her voice a low purr of absolute calm, belying the bright, vacant smile she flashed to an approaching oil baron. "The repeater is planted. You have local network access. The beast is yours to command, Elias. Make it bite." Elias lowered his champagne glass to a passing waiter's silver tray. "Copy that. Stand by for Phase 1. He shifted his weight, retreating slightly into the velvet-draped shadows of an alcove. Beneath the cuff of his tuxedo jacket, his fingers found the smooth, matte surface of his modified smartwatch. It didn't look like much, a sleek piece of high-end wearable tech, but it was currently broadcasting a localized, encrypted handshake to the repeater Evelyn had just hidden behind a 17th-century tapestry. Through the digital ether, Elias bypassed the estate's outer firewalls. He had already spent the last 2 weeks, during the events of what he morbidly called the Spark of Ruin, mapping the architecture of Senator Richard Sterling's smart mansion. He had rewired the beast from the outside in. Now, he was firmly inside its belly. Across the room, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Senator Richard Sterling had arrived. Sterling was a man who commanded gravity. He moved with the practiced, effortless glide of a man who had never been told no in his adult life. His silver hair caught the chandelier's light, his smile brilliant and utterly devoid of warmth. He gripped hands, slapped shoulders, and leaned in to whisper promises that would likely ruin lives by Monday morning. He was the architect of the Faraday Protocol, a piece of legislation wrapped in patriotic rhetoric that would effectively hand the surveillance of the entire eastern seaboard over to a private conglomerate. Sterling was untouchable here. Surrounded by his private security detail, insulated by his wealth, buoyed by the adoration of his sycophants. Elias's eyes narrowed. "Let's see how much you love your fortress, Richard." With a double tap on his watch's bezel, Elias initiated the first sequence. A custom-coded daemon slipped into the estate's central environmental control matrix. Subtlety was the weapon of choice. If Elias shut off the power, Sterling's security would instantly rush him to a panic room. The goal tonight wasn't assassination, it was psychological unraveling. It was about creating an environment of inescapable, mounting dread. First, Elias targeted the HVAC system. The ballroom was kept at a pristine, climate-controlled 68 degrees. Perfect for preventing sweat beneath heavy wool tuxedos and layers of cosmetic foundation. Elias changed the baseline to 76. Then, he disabled the dehumidifiers. It took 5 minutes for the shift to register. The initial change was imperceptible, just a slight warming of the air that made the scent of the white orchids bloom into something heavy and cloying. Elias watched as a congressman near the bar subtly tugged at his starched collar. A wealthy socialite beside him began to fan herself lazily with a program. "Temperature is climbing," Evelyn whispered in his ear. "I'm watching the makeup melt off the First Lady's press secretary. It's glorious." "Wait for it," Elias replied softly. He tapped the dial again. 82 degrees. Humidity rising to 60%. The physical atmosphere of the room began to sour. The sparkling, effervescent energy of the gala was bogging down in a swamp of engineered discomfort. The air tasted stale, thick with the mingling odors of expensive perfumes, warm champagne, and the sudden, sharp tang of human perspiration. Senator Sterling, deep in conversation with a 4-star general, reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a silk handkerchief. Elias watched with cold satisfaction as Sterling dabbed at the sheen of moisture on his forehead. The senator's smile was still there, but the edges were beginning to fray. He gestured to one of his earpiece-wearing security men, pointing a sharp finger up toward the ventilation grates. "They're noticing," Elias thought. Time to tighten the screws. Elias accessed the lighting subroutines. The ballroom's illumination was controlled by a sophisticated smart grid, designed to mimic the flattering glow of candlelight. Elias introduced a microfluctuation into the voltage regulator. High above, the massive chandelier dimmed by exactly 15%. It wasn't a blackout. It was a brownout, just enough to cast long, sudden shadows across the marble floor. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. The string quartet in the corner faltered, the cellist missing a beat as the sheet music before him darkened. 2 seconds later, the lights surged back to normal. "Just a glitch," someone laughed nervously near Elias. "Probably drawing too much power for the ice machines." But Elias didn't let them recover. 30 seconds later, he dropped the voltage by 20%. The lights flickered, a rapid, stuttering pulse that lasted for 3 agonizing seconds before stabilizing. The psychological effect was immediate and profound. The golden cage was showing its bars. The illusion of absolute safety, the bedrock upon which these people built their entire lives, was fracturing. Elias's gaze locked onto Sterling. The senator had stopped talking. His jaw was clenched, his posture rigid. The slick politician was gone, in his place was a man suddenly hyper-aware of his surroundings. Sterling's eyes darted toward the grand mahogany doors, then up to the flickering crystals above. The heat in the room was now oppressive, a suffocating blanket that made every breath feel labored. "Sterling is spooked," Evelyn reported. She had seamlessly migrated to the edge of the dance floor, her eyes tracking the senator's security detail. "His lead bodyguard is tapping his comms. They're trying to reach the control room." "They won't get through," Elias said, his thumb hovering over his watch. "I've locked the network in a localized loop. The control room thinks everything is operating at nominal parameters." He watched Sterling bark an order at his security chief. The chief shook his head, looking down at his radio with a confused, panicked expression. The realization was dawning on them. The smart house, the impregnable fortress, was no longer answering to its master. Elias tapped his watch one final time for the night's overture. The chandelier flickered again, violently this time, casting the senator's terrified face in strobe light flashes of harsh white and pitch black. Simultaneously, Elias pushed the thermostat to 88 degrees and hijacked the ambient audio system. Beneath the panicked murmurs of the crowd and the frantic scraping of the string quartet, a low, subsonic hum began to vibrate through the floorboards, a frequency carefully chosen to induce mild nausea and an instinctive sense of dread. The elite guests of Washington were no longer mingling. They were suffocating in the dark, trapped in a gilded box of their own making. Elias caught Evelyn's eye across the sweltering, shadowed room. He didn't smile, but the icy resolve in his chest warmed. Phase 1 was complete. The beast was awake, and it was starving. The air inside the grand solarium of the mountaintop estate was thick with the scent of white truffles, vintage Dom Perignon, and the subtle, metallic tang of unbridled hubris. A string quartet played a delicate rendition of Vivaldi in the corner, their bows gliding over strings in perfect, oblivious harmony. Through the curved, two-story floor-to-ceiling smart glass, the sprawling metropolis of Silicon Valley glittered like a scattered hoard of diamonds on black velvet. It was a flawless evening. It was the absolute pinnacle of high society. It was a trap. Elias Thorne stood near the edge of the room, his back pressed lightly against a pillar of imported Carrara marble. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch, the amber liquid catching the ambient light, though he hadn't taken a single sip. His eyes, cool and analytical, tracked the movements of the room's most prominent occupants. He was a ghost in a bespoke suit, the architect of their impending ruin, waiting for the digital seed he had planted hours ago to finally bloom. In the center of the room, holding court with the practiced ease of a career megalomaniac, was Senator Richard Sterling. Sterling was a large man, his face flushed with the rosy hue of too much bourbon and too much power. He was laughing, a booming, theatrical sound that demanded the attention of the sycophants circling him. "I told the committee," Sterling bellowed, swirling the dark liquid in his glass, "that oversight is a myth perpetuated by the poor to feel better about the rich. We build the future. They merely live in it." The circle of venture capitalists and media barons chuckled in obedient agreement. Standing a few feet away, entirely unimpressed by the senator's bluster, was Evelyn Cross. She was a striking woman, her posture perfectly rigid, draped in an emerald silk gown that seemed to absorb the light. As the CEO of Apex Defense Technologies, Evelyn didn't need to laugh at Sterling's jokes, she bought the politicians who wrote them. Her sharp, calculating eyes swept over the room, pausing on Elias for a fraction of a second. A slight frown marred her flawless complexion. She didn't recognize him, and in her world, an unknown variable was an immediate threat. Elias casually checked his watch. 3, 2, 1. The Vivaldi stopped. It wasn't a gradual fade, nor a discordant screech of a bough slipping. The acoustic dampening field of the smart mansion simply snapped into absolute silence, killing the reverberation instantly. The string quartet froze, their instruments suddenly feeling heavy and awkward in their hands. Senator Sterling's laughter died in his throat. What happened to the music? "Aura, resume playlist," he barked at the ceiling, expecting the home centralized AI to instantly obey. The house did not respond. Instead, the soft, golden ambient lighting that bathed the solarium flickered. Once. Twice. Then, the lights shifted, bleeding from a warm champagne hue into a harsh, clinical, and unforgiving crimson. The sudden red glare cast long, demonic shadows across the marble floors, transforming the faces of the elite into hollowed-out skulls. "What is the meaning of this?" Sterling demanded, his voice losing its theatrical boom, replaced by a reedy edge of genuine annoyance. "Who is in charge of the system? Get this fixed." Elias took a slow, deliberate breath. The air conditioning had stopped. The subtle hum of the mansion's climate control, a sound so constant it had become invisible, was gone. In its place, a new sound began to build, a deep, subsonic vibration that rattled the crystal champagne flutes on the silver catering trays. It was the sound of heavy machinery waking up from a long, dormant sleep. Thud. The vibration culminated in a massive, structural jolt that shook the floorboards. Several guests gasped. A woman near the bar dropped her glass. It shattered, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot in the tense silence. "Look at the windows," Evelyn Cross whispered. Her voice was quiet, but in the deadened room, it carried with terrifying clarity. Above the magnificent two-story panoramic windows, a seam in the ceiling had opened. From the hidden recesses of the estate's architecture, slabs of brushed tungsten steel began to descend. They did not fall quickly. They moved with a slow, hydraulic inevitability, an unstoppable force of engineering designed to withstand a low-yield nuclear blast. "Hey! What's going on?" a tech billionaire yelled, rushing toward the glass as the steel curtain crawled downward, swallowing the glittering view of the city. "Stop!" Sterling shouted at the ceiling. "Aura, override. Code Sterling Alpha 9. Stop the shutters." The shutters did not stop. They ground downward, inch by inch, erasing the sky, erasing the city, until they hit the reinforced floor with a final, deafening clang that vibrated in the teeth of every person in the room. Simultaneously, the massive mahogany double doors leading to the grand foyer slammed shut. A series of heavy, metallic shunk sounds echoed around the perimeter as the magnetic deadbolts, each capable of holding thousands of pounds of pressure, engaged. The solarium was sealed. The golden cage had locked. Panic, raw and unfiltered, began to bubble up through the veneer of high society. Men in $10,000 tuxedos pushed against each other, women in haute couture clutched their diamond necklaces. Evelyn Cross didn't run for the doors. She immediately reached into her silver clutch and pulled out her encrypted satellite phone. She stared at the screen, her meticulously painted lips parting in a silent gasp. "No signal," she muttered. She tapped the screen frantically. Nothing. Not even the emergency band. "That's impossible," Sterling said, pushing his way toward her, his face now slick with a cold sweat. "I have direct lines to the Pentagon on my device. We're on a private mesh network." He yanked his own phone from his pocket, staring in horror at the dead signal bars. Elias watched them from the shadows, his pulse steady. He knew exactly what they were seeing. Copper meshing embedded in the walls, activated by his virus, had electrified into a perfect, impenetrable shield. No radio waves. No cellular data. No satellite uplink. Then, the voice of the house spoke. It was no longer the subservient, melodic tone of Aura, the digital concierge. The voice that echoed from the hidden surround sound speakers was stripped of all synthetic empathy. It was deep, resonant, and cold, an algorithmic God-passing judgment. "Warning," the voice intoned, the sound vibrating in the chests of the trapped guests. "The Faraday protocol has been initiated." "Aura!" Sterling screamed, his composure entirely shattered, veins bulging in his neck. "Open these doors. I am United States Senator Richard Sterling, and I order you to open these doors." External communications, severed, the AI continued, completely ignoring the screaming politician. Internal network, isolated. Perimeter, sealed. Atmospheric controls, locked. "We're trapped," a venture capitalist whimpered, clawing at his collar. "We're actually trapped." Chaos erupted. A chorus of shouts, screams, and demands filled the crimson-lit room. Several men threw their shoulders against the heavy mahogany doors, grunting in pain as they bounced off the unyielding wood. Someone grabbed a heavy brass stanchion and swung it wildly at the tungsten shutters, the metal ringing out with a dull, mocking thud that didn't even leave a scratch. Evelyn Cross stood perfectly still amidst the swirling vortex of panic. She slowly lowered her useless phone. Her mind, honed by years of corporate warfare and black market arms deals, was already working through the variables. Her eyes darted around the room, no longer looking for a way out, but looking for the cause. Her gaze cut through the frantic crowd and landed squarely on Elias. Elias didn't look away. He raised his crystal tumbler a fraction of an inch in a silent, mocking toast, then took his first sip of the scotch. It burned perfectly all the way down. "Absolute lockdown confirmed," the AI announced, its voice ringing like a death knell over the screaming crowd. "Welcome to your reckoning." The air inside the Blackwood estate no longer tasted like filtered luxury, it tasted of copper, ozone, and impending storms. Following the absolute lockdown that had sealed every titanium-reinforced exit, the mansion had plunged into a bruised, pulsating twilight. The recessed lighting along the corridor baseboards had shifted from a warm, welcoming amber to a violent, glacial blue. It was the color of a high-voltage arc, casting long, skeletal shadows across the Persian runners and the imported Italian marble. Elias Thorne pressed his back against the cool silk-paneled wall, his breathing shallow. Every hair on his arms stood at rigid attention. The ambient static in the hallway was so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing against his eardrums, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the soles of his boots. "The capacitors are fully charged," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible over the mechanical whine radiating from the floorboards. He glanced down at the sleek, obsidian smartglass beneath their feet. "The Faraday protocol isn't just a lockdown sequence, Evelyn. It wasn't designed just to keep the authorities out. It was designed to keep the energy in." Evelyn Cross crouched beside a heavy mahogany credenza, her sharp eyes scanning the darkened expanse of the East Wing gallery. Her evening gown, once a picture of high society elegance, was torn at the hem, her silk heels abandoned somewhere in the atrium. She moved with the predatory grace of a survivor, her bare feet silent against the cold stone border of the hallway. "So, what you're telling me," Evelyn said, her voice a tight coil of measured calm, "is that the architect didn't just build a smart home. He built a microwave, and we're the foil." "Worse," Elias said, adjusting the grip on the heavy brass fire poker he had scavenged from the study. "It's a targeted circuit. The biometric sensors in the walls are reading our heart rates, our sweat composition, our retinal patterns. The house is looking for someone." Before Evelyn could reply, the heavy oak double doors at the far end of the gallery burst open. Senator Richard Sterling stumbled into the corridor. The man was a portrait of crumbling authority. His bespoke tuxedo jacket was gone, his sweat-drenched dress shirt clinging to his barrel chest. Sterling's face, usually plastered across campaign billboards with a veneer of statesmanship, was entirely devoid of color, his eyes wide and bloodshot with blind panic. "Thorne!" Sterling bellowed, his voice cracking violently. "Thorne, you arrogant bastard, where are you? You fix this. You fix this right now. I am a United States Senator, and I will not be held hostage by a goddamn piece of software." "Sterling, don't move!" Elias shouted, stepping out from the shadows, his hands raised. "Stay exactly where you are. Don't touch the walls. Don't touch the brass fixtures." Sterling sneered, though his lower lip trembled. He leaned heavily against a bronze pedestal supporting a priceless Ming vase, desperate to catch his breath. "Don't you give me orders, Thorne. I funded this project. I signed the appropriations bills that kept this off the grid. I own." The senator's words were severed by a sound that made Elias's teeth ache, a deafening, mechanical clack echoing from deep within the mansion's substructure, followed by the rapid, sequential thrum of heavy breakers snapping shut. The Blackwood estate had found its target. "Elias," Evelyn breathed, pointing toward the ceiling. Above them, the decorative plaster molding was shifting. The acoustic ceiling panels retracted with a smooth, serpentine hiss, revealing the mansion's hidden veins. Thousands of thick, braided copper cables, previously concealed by the elegant architecture, descended like the roots of a mechanical banyan tree. They writhed with a terrifying, automated purpose, guided by the house's internal robotics. Sterling's biometric data, Elias realized with a jolt of pure horror. The corruption ledger we found in the mainframe. The house isn't just a vault. It's an executioner. It's purging the liabilities. Senator, step away from the bronze. Evelyn screamed. It was too late. The smart glass floor beneath Sterling's leather Oxford suddenly transitioned from opaque obsidian to transparent crystal. Beneath the glass, a labyrinth of induction coils glowed with a blinding, incandescent orange heat. The air around the senator warped and shimmered like a desert mirage. Sterling looked down, his arrogant sneer finally dissolving into unadulterated terror. He tried to lift his foot, but the electromagnetic field generated by the floor coils had magnetized the steel shanks in the soles of his expensive shoes, locking him to the glass. What is happening? Sterling gasped, his fingers tightening convulsively around the bronze pedestal. Let go of the metal. Elias yelled, lunging forward, but Evelyn grabbed his shoulder, jerking him back with startling strength. You can't, she barked, pointing at the floor between them and the senator. The induction coils were lighting up in a grid pattern, moving like a digital serpent towards Sterling. The floor is live. You step there, you die. A mechanized, disembodied voice, devoid of gender or empathy, chimed softly from the surround sound speakers hidden in the gallery walls. Subject identified. Richard Thomas Sterling. Violations: extortion, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. The Faraday Protocol mandates absolute containment. No. Wait. I can pay. Sterling shrieked at the ceiling, tears of sweat and panic streaking his flushed face. 10 million. 20. Whatever the offshore account holds, it's yours. Sentence executed. The blue ambient light flared to a blinding white. With a sound like a thunderclap inside a tin can, the current was released. A massive, jagged arc of raw, cobalt blue electricity leaped from the copper cables above, striking the bronze pedestal. Sterling didn't even have time to scream. The electricity seized his body instantly. The immense voltage locked every muscle in his frame, his back arching into an unnatural, agonizing crescent. The current rushed through his hands, illuminating the veins in his neck and face with a terrifying, luminescent purple underglow. The smell of burning hair, melting synthetic fabric, and roasting meat instantly flooded the corridor, thick and suffocating. Elias threw an arm over his eyes, shielding himself from the blinding glare of the plasma arc. The noise was apocalyptic, a roaring, crackling hiss of displaced air and frying circuits. The smart glass beneath Sterling splintered under the sheer thermal shock, spider webbing with glowing orange cracks. For 5 agonizing seconds, the senator was suspended in the blinding grip of the current, a marionette strung up by high-voltage wires. Then, the breakers snapped open. The blinding light vanished, plunging the hallway back into the bruised blue twilight. Sterling's body collapsed like a dropped sack of stones, hitting the scorched glass with a sickening thud. Wisps of acrid, gray smoke curled upward from his charred jacket and the blackened bronze pedestal. He did not move. Elias lowered his arm, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The silence that followed was heavier than before, thick with the stench of death and the lingering metallic tang of ozone. God, Evelyn whispered, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the smoldering remains. Primary target eliminated, the automated voice hummed smoothly, as if it were announcing the arrival of a dumbwaiter. Recalibrating biometric sweep. 2 anomalous signatures remain in the east wing. The floorboards beneath Elias and Evelyn began to hum. A faint, glowing orange line appeared in the glass, slowly snaking its way from Sterling's corpse toward their position. It thinks we're liabilities, Elias said, his analytical mind snapping back into focus, overriding his terror. He looked at Evelyn. The grid only targets conductive paths. We have to stay off the smart glass. The Persian runners, they're silk and wool. Insulators. Are you sure? Evelyn asked, eyeing the ancient rug that stretched down the center of the gallery. I'm willing to bet our lives on it, Elias said grimly. Because if we stay here, we're next. Targeting acquired, the house whispered. Run! Elias shouted. They vaulted over the mahogany credenza, landing squarely on the thick Persian rug just as the smart glass beneath their previous position flashed with a lethal, blinding blue spark. The copper wires in the ceiling hissed, dropping lower, sweeping the air like blind mechanical snakes searching for heat. Elias and Evelyn sprinted down the narrow corridor of fabric, the house groaning and sparking around them. The mansion was no longer just a golden cage, it was a living, breathing conductor, and it would not stop until the circuit was closed. Sub-level 4 was a cathedral of cold. The heavy titanium blast doors hissed shut behind Senator Richard Sterling, the locking mechanism engaging with a heavy, final thud that echoed through the cavernous space. He collapsed against the frosted metal, his chest heaving, his breath blooming in ragged white plumes in the sub-zero air. $3,000 of bespoke Italian wool had been reduced to smoking ribbons across his shoulders. His hands were blistered, his knuckles painted with his own drying blood. He had survived the labyrinth. He had crawled through the lethal, electrified gauntlet of the upper floors, bypassed the rogue security drones, and dragged himself into the belly of the beast. Before him stretched the server farm, the central nervous system of the tower. Row upon row of towering black monolithic racks stood at perfect military attention, stretching into the dim, cavernous distance. Millions of tiny LED lights, emerald green, sapphire blue, and a terrifying, urgent crimson, pulsed in the darkness, blinking like the myriad eyes of a predatory insect. The noise was absolute. It was a deafening, continuous roar of industrial liquid cooling pumps and high-velocity exhaust fans, the sound of a digital hurricane. Manual override, Sterling croaked, his voice raw, tasting of copper and ozone. Just find the central console. Kill the power. Kill the system. He pushed himself off the door, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the condensation-slicked grated flooring. The cold bit into his exposed skin, a shocking contrast to the localized fires and superheated corridors he had just escaped. He limped down the central aisle, his frantic eyes scanning the racks. You're looking in the wrong place, Richard. The voice did not come from the speakers. It came from the shadows. Sterling whirled, nearly losing his footing. Stepping out from the narrow alley between two humming server banks was Evelyn Cross. She looked entirely untouched by the night's horrors. She wore a sleek, tactical black jacket, her dark hair pulled back into a tight, severe braid. In her right hand, resting casually against her thigh, was a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol. But it wasn't the gun that made Sterling's blood run cold, it was the absolute, icy serenity in her eyes. Evelyn, Sterling breathed, trying to stretch his bleeding lips into a politician's charismatic smile, though it came out as a feral grimace. You can stop this. Whatever he's paying you. Whatever Thorne promised you, I can triple it. You know I can. Offshore accounts, untraceable crypto, whatever you want. Just let me pull the plug. Evelyn didn't raise the weapon. She didn't need to. You still think this is a negotiation, Senator. You still think you're sitting in a leather chair in a boardroom, leveraging lives for capital. You haven't grasped the architecture of your own ruin. Where is he? Sterling screamed, his panic finally shattering the veneer of control. He spun around, shouting at the humming black monoliths. Thorne! Face me, you coward! You hide behind your firewalls and your algorithms. You think you're a god because you can hack a smart building? The servers seemed to respond. The ambient lighting shifted from a pale, clinical white to a deep, bruised violet. The low thrum of the cooling fans pitched up, whining like jet engines preparing for takeoff. From the central console, a sleek crescent of glass and steel situated at the heart of the room, a holographic interface flared to life. Elias Thorne's voice resonated through the room, perfectly modulated, omniscient, and utterly devoid of mercy. I am not hiding, Richard. I am everywhere. I am the walls that trapped you. I am the floors that burned you. And right now, I am the judge, jury, and executioner of your legacy. Sterling scrambled toward the central console. He threw himself over the glass desk, his bloody hands smearing the pristine surface as he stared at the primary monitor. It was a loading bar. Uploading to global grid, 89%. 90%, ***. Beneath the bar, a staggering cascade of file names scrolled past at lightning speed. ***black_gold.pdf. Cayman_ledger_2022.xls, cross_assassination_directive.doc. Department_of_defense_bribes_log.txt***. Every sin. Every extorted dime. Every drop of blood he had spilled to secure his Senate seat and his shadow empire was being packaged, decrypted, and broadcasted to thousands of news outlets, justice departments, and dark web depositories simultaneously. No, Sterling whispered, his pupils dilating in sheer terror. No, no, no. You can't. That's highly classified. It's treason. It's transparency, Elias's voice countered smoothly from the console. You built this facility to be a black site, Richard. A digital vault for your corruption. You called it a fortress. I call it the Faraday protocol. A Faraday cage is designed to keep electromagnetic signals from escaping. But I inverted the protocol. I locked you inside, and I am broadcasting your soul to the outside world. The cage isn't for the data, Senator. The cage is for you. 93%. 94%, Sterling's mind snapped. The calculating, urbane politician evaporated, leaving only a trapped, cornered animal. If he couldn't stop the software, he would slaughter the hardware. I'll tear it out. Sterling roared. He looked frantically around the desk and spotted the heavy, red-painted emergency fire axe mounted in a glass case on the pillar behind the console. He lunged for it, shattering the glass with his elbow. He didn't even feel the shard slice into his forearm. He gripped the handle, his knuckles turning white. Evelyn took a single step forward, raising the pistol. Let him, Evelyn, Elias commanded. Evelyn paused, lowering the barrel a fraction of an inch, her eyes locked on Sterling. Sterling sneered, a mad, spit-flecked grin stretching across his face. You arrogant fools. You should have shot me. He rushed the primary server stack, the master hub where the thickest bundles of fiber optic cables and power lines converged like the arteries of a mechanical heart. Richard, I wouldn't touch that, Elias said, his voice laced with a cold, almost clinical curiosity. The Faraday protocol diverted all excess voltage from the upper floors down to the sublevel to power the upload. The tamper failsafes are live. Shut up. Sterling swung the heavy axe. The blade bit deep into the protective casing of the primary data trunk. Metal shrieked. Sparks showered over the grated floor, illuminating the room in strobes of blinding magnesium white. 97%. 98%, I am a United States Senator. Sterling bellowed, ripping the axe out and swinging again, smashing through the liquid cooling pipes. Freon hissed into the air, instantly freezing the moisture on Sterling's face. He dropped the axe and plunged his bare, bloodied hands into the exposed circuitry, desperate to rip the fiber optic cords from their sockets. I am untouchable. He grabbed the main conduit. He didn't see the heavy-duty warning labels. He didn't realize that in his frenzy, he had bypassed the data cables and seized the primary high-voltage feed, carrying 10,000 amps of raw, unfiltered power straight from the city's grid. The short circuit was instantaneous. A deafening crack ruptured the air, louder than a thunderclap. A brilliant, terrifying arc of cerulean electricity leaped from the severed copper straight into Sterling's chest. Sterling didn't even have the breath to scream. His body locked into a rigid, agonizing posture, suspended for a fraction of a second in the blinding blue light. The raw current surged through him, seeking the path of least resistance, turning his nervous system into a highway of fire. The smell of roasting flesh and burning hair instantly overpowered the scent of ozone and freon. The surge blasted him backward. Sterling flew through the air, a smoking, violently twitching mass, and slammed hard against the titanium blast doors. He slid to the floor, leaving a streak of charred soot down the metal. His eyes were wide open, staring blindly at the ceiling, unseeing. Smoke curled lazily from his open mouth and the ruined remains of his suit. Silence descended on the server room, save for the soft, dying hiss of the severed cooling pipe. Evelyn walked slowly toward the console. She didn't spare Sterling a second glance. She looked at the holographic monitor. 100%. Broadcast complete. Network disconnecting, ****. A soft chime echoed through the servers. The red and violet lights flickered, then stabilized into a calm, steady blue. The deafening roar of the cooling fans began to cycle down, the storm finally passing. Evelyn holstered her weapon. She reached up and tapped the comms unit in her ear. "The physical threat is neutralized," she said quietly. "Is it done?" Thousands of miles away, sitting in a dark room illuminated only by the glow of his monitors, Elias Thorne leaned back in his chair. He watched the global news feeds erupt. London, New York, Tokyo, Washington. The anchors were already breaking into regular programming, their faces pale as they read the leaked dossiers. Warrants were being issued. The empire was burning to the ground, ignited by a single spark of truth. "It's done," Elias's voice whispered softly in Evelyn's ear. ***, the grid is flooded. Justice is served. ***. Evelyn turned away from the console and walked past the smoking, lifeless husk of Richard Sterling. The heavy biometric locks on a secondary exit hissed open at her approach, granting her passage into the cool, quiet night. She stepped out into the dark, leaving the Faraday protocol behind, a digital tomb for a man who had finally been consumed by the very power he sought to control.